Look, I need you to stop whatever you're doing right now, because what went down on SportsCenter last night might be one of the most shocking developments we've seen all season. And I'm not talking about another blockbuster trade or some injury that changes playoff seeding. No, this is about Chris Paul, one of the greatest point guards to ever touch a basketball, getting unceremoniously cut by the Clippers in the middle of the night via an Instagram story that felt more like a breakup text than a professional sports transaction. And the SportsCenter crew, they were absolutely stunned breaking this news down because nobody saw this coming. Nobody expected CP3's tenure with the Clippers to end like this, and most importantly, nobody could have predicted the chain reaction of speculation that immediately followed about whether the Lakers would finally, after 14 years of what-ifs and broken dreams, bring Chris Paul across the hallway to wear purple and gold instead of that other LA uniform that we don't really acknowledge exists. Hey, what's up, everyone? 1 second before we dive in. That like button right there? Hit it now. Takes literally 1 second, but makes a massive difference in growing this channel and reaching more fans. Just smash that, like real quick. Every like pushes this video further. So do me that favor right now. So SportsCenter opens with Scott Van Pelt at the desk, and he's got this look on his face like he just witnessed something deeply uncomfortable. And he starts showing this Instagram story that Chris Paul posted at 2:40 in the morning, which is already weird, because when has a professional athlete ever broken major career news via Instagram story in the middle of the night unless something has gone catastrophically wrong behind the scene? The post just says, "Just found out I'm being sent home with the doses," which is cryptic and emotional and exactly the kind of message you'd expect from someone who just got blindsided by a franchise decision that he clearly didn't see coming. And SVP is breaking down the timeline here, explaining how just hours after that Instagram post, the Clippers officially announced they were releasing Chris Paul, with Ty Lue saying the partnership wasn't a good fit. Which is NBA coach speak for, "We tried to make this work, but it was a disaster from day one." But here's where the SportsCenter analysis got absolutely fascinating. And this is the part that had me completely locked in, because they weren't just doing the surface-level reporting of who got cut and what the official statements were. They brought in Adrian Wojnarowski to break down what actually happened behind the scene, and Woj starts revealing all these details about how dysfunctional the situation had become in that Clippers locker room. Apparently, Chris Paul's leadership style, which has served him well throughout his Hall of Fame career, completely clashed with the current Clippers roster and coaching staff to the point where he hadn't spoken to Ty Lue for several weeks. Think about that for a second. Your veteran point guard, who's supposed to be a floor general and leader, hasn't had a conversation with the head coach in weeks. That's not a poor fit. That's a complete organizational breakdown that probably should have been addressed months ago before it got to this point. And then Woj drops this bombshell that Chris Haynes had reported earlier, that Chris Paul actually requested a meeting with Ty Lue to discuss the perception that he was being a negative presence on the team, and Lue straight up refused to meet with him. Like, that's not just bad communication. That's a head coach actively avoiding one of his players, which suggests the relationship had deteriorated so badly that they couldn't even have a professional conversation to try and salvage things. And Scott Van Pelt is sitting there shaking his head, because this is the Clippers we're talking about. An organization that has a long documented history of dysfunction and making moves that seem good on paper, but implode spectacularly in practice. And this CP3 situation is just the latest example of that organizational incompetence that's defined the franchise for decades. Lawrence Frank, the team president, gave this statement, trying to do damage control, saying they're not blaming Chris Paul for the team's underperformance and that he's a legendary Clipper who had an historic career. But SVP and the crew immediately called that out as corporate speak that doesn't match reality. If you're cutting a guy averaging 3 points per game and claiming that roster move is necessary to turn your season around, you are absolutely blaming him for the underperformance, even if you won't say it explicitly. And the SportsCenter panel started breaking down the numbers, showing that the Clippers' struggles this season have almost nothing to do with Chris Paul's on-court production, and everything to do with having assembled the oldest roster in NBA history, with guys who were great in 2010 trying to compete in 2025, which was a flawed roster construction strategy from the beginning that was doomed to fail regardless of whether CP3 was on the team or not. But then the conversation shifted in a direction that I found absolutely fascinating, and this is where SportsCenter really separated itself from the quick-hit social media coverage, because they started exploring the historical context of Chris Paul and the Lakers, and whether this could finally be the moment where that partnership that was supposed to happen in 2011 actually comes to fruition 14 years later. And they brought in Ramona Shelburne, who covers both LA teams, to provide insight into whether there's any realistic possibility that the Lakers would pursue Chris Paul now that he's a free agent. And the way she framed it was perfect, because she acknowledged both the romantic appeal of finally completing that vetoed trade, while also being realistic about whether it actually makes basketball sense in 2025. So for those who don't remember or weren't following the NBA back then, SportsCenter did this whole flashback segment showing how in 2011 the Lakers had agreed to a 3-team trade with the Hornets and Rockets that would have brought Chris Paul to LA to play alongside Kobe Bryant in what would have been one of the most dynamic backcourts in league history. The trade was done, all 3 teams had agreed, and then David Stern, who was the commissioner at the time and was serving as interim owner of the Hornets, because they were in the process of being sold, vetoed the trade citing basketball reasons, which to this day remains one of the most controversial decisions in NBA history. And within days of vetoing the Lakers trade, Chris Paul was traded to the Clippers instead, which Lakers fans have never forgiven or forgotten, because it robbed them of potentially multiple championships in the final years of Kobe's prime. Scott Van Pelt made this great point about how rare it is in sports that you get a chance to correct a historical wrong, to go back and complete something that should have happened but was prevented by circumstances beyond anyone's control. And the Chris Paul situation represents exactly that kind of opportunity for the Lakers, if they wanted to pursue it. You could see the nostalgia in SVP's voice as he talked about what a CP3 Kobe backcourt would have looked like, how they'd already proven they could play together on Team USA, how the spacing and playmaking and basketball IQ would have been off the charts. And then he transitioned to the reality check, which is that this isn't 2011 anymore. Chris Paul is 39 years old. He's clearly past his prime, even if he can still contribute. And the Lakers' roster construction doesn't really have a logical spot for him given their current depth at guard. Ramona Shelburne broke down the Lakers' current backcourt situation in detail, and this is where you really understood why signing Chris Paul probably doesn't make basketball sense, even if it makes emotional sense. You've got Luka Doncic, who's your primary ball handler and one of the best playmakers in the league, Austin Reeves, who's emerged as a legitimate secondary creator, LeBron James, who despite being in year 22, still runs a significant portion of the offense, Marcus Smart, providing that veteran presence and defensive intensity, and even Gabe Vincent, who when healthy brings playmaking and shooting. Where exactly does Chris Paul fit into that rotation? And more importantly, does adding a 39-year-old point guard, who just got released for chemistry issues, actually make your championship odds better? Or are you just making a nostalgic move that feels good but doesn't improve the team? The SportsCenter panel then got into a really interesting debate about the value of veteran leadership and whether there's something to be said for bringing in someone like Chris Paul, even if he's not going to play major minutes, just to have that Hall of Fame pedigree and that championship experience in the locker room. One of the analysts made the comparison to when the Warriors brought in Andre Iguodala in a reduced role during their dynasty years, not because they needed his on-court production as much as they needed his basketball IQ and his ability to mentor younger players and his understanding of what it takes to win at the highest level. Could Chris Paul fill a similar role for the Lakers, being that veteran voice who's been through every playoff scenario imaginable and can provide guidance in crucial moments. But then Woj pushed back pretty hard on that comparison, pointing out that the Iguodala situation was different because he was a seamless fit into Golden State's system and culture, whereas Chris Paul just got released specifically because his leadership style clashed with his team's culture. You can't just assume that chemistry issues that existed in one locker room won't exist in another, and if CP3's approach to leadership rubbed the Clippers the wrong way, there's no guarantee it would work any better with the Lakers' current roster construction. And honestly, that's a really valid point that I think a lot of people overlook when they romanticize these veteran acquisitions. Not every great player translates into being a great teammate, especially in the twilight of their career when they're adjusting to reduced roles and diminished responsibilities. The financial aspect of a potential signing got discussed extensively because that's always relevant when evaluating NBA roster decisions, and the consensus seemed to be that Chris Paul would sign for the veteran minimum, which is roughly $3 million. So it's not like the Lakers would be making some massive financial commitment that hamstrings their flexibility. They do have a roster spot available, or they could create one by making a corresponding move. So from a pure cap perspective, it's definitely feasible if they wanted to do it. But as SVP pointed out, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And the Lakers need to be focused on adding pieces that actually address their biggest weaknesses, which are wing depth and defensive versatility, not bringing in another ball-dominant guard who's well past his prime. What made this SportsCenter segment so compelling was how they framed the Chris Paul situation as part of a larger narrative about legacy and redemption, and the ways professional sports can sometimes give you unexpected opportunities to rewrite history even if the circumstances are completely different than they were originally. There's something poetic about Chris Paul potentially ending up with the Lakers 14 years after that vetoed trade, even if it's not in the capacity anyone imagined back in 2011 when he was still an MVP-caliber player. And Scott Van Pelt wrapped the segment by acknowledging that emotional appeal while also being pragmatic about the basketball reality, saying that Lakers fans will always wonder what could have been with that 2011 trade, but that chasing ghosts and trying to recreate the past is rarely a recipe for success in professional sports. The show closed with highlights of Chris Paul's career achievements, from his Hornets days when he was legitimately one of the 3 or 4 best players on the planet, to his time with the Clippers when Lob City was must-watch television, to his later years with the Rockets and Suns where he proved he could still be effective as a secondary star rather than the primary guy. And seeing all those highlights back-to-back really drives home how much he's accomplished and how his legacy is secure regardless of what happens with this Clippers situation, or whether he ends up with the Lakers or somewhere else entirely. Chris Paul will be a first-ballot Hall of Famer, one of the greatest point guards to ever play. And this messy ending with the Clippers doesn't change any of that, even if it's an unfortunate final chapter in what should have been a better situation.